to our weekly book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are continuing our discussion of the Danish way of raising teens. My name is Megan, and my bookworm co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda. If you're new to our book club, here's how it works. Number 1, you don't even have to read the book. We come and we chat about the current book every week. If you want to tune in and absorb our digest while folding laundry and doing whatever else you need to, and then move on with your day, you are welcome to. That works for us.
Absolutely. Number 2, if you want to read the book along with us, you absolutely can. There's a link to purchase the book in our show notes or our podcast description. Full disclosure, we do share affiliate links for our books. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use our affiliate links, but it does help fund our podcast, and we greatly appreciate your support.
Yes, totally. Number 3, you can join us for book club. Did you know that? You head over to our spiffy new website, homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com. I know the name is shocking. Click on the book club link, and from there, you can submit a request to join us live for a future book club recording. We'll do the book club discussion with you and stick it on all of our social media and different places. Yeah. So we would love to welcome you here on our book club with us.
Yes, absolutely.
So today we are discussing chapters 7 and 8. So let's dig in. Chapter 7 is uniqueness. Who am I? Who am I, Megan?
I'm still trying to find out at 43. I think for me, that's been the biggest takeaway so far from this book. We're almost done. We have one more week of reading this book. But for me, that's been the biggest takeaway, is this reminder of things that we take for granted, things that have become mostly second nature for us, or mostly comfortable, or we've developed coping mechanisms around, forgetting that those are not on tap for our kids just yet, that they haven't fully figured out who they are and how they want to appear in the world and how they communicate with people and how to navigate challenging social situations. And so there was a blurb on the bottom of page 139 that says, to have an identity means to be true to yourself in different situations, at different times, and with different people. And I thought, how true is that you see these teen movies, for example, where there's the athletic group and the nerdy group and the goth group and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's like kids are trying these different personas in so many instances to try to figure out what feels comfortable, what skin is their skin. And I feel like it's easy for us to forget that as adults when we're putting our kids out there, or when we're mentoring them through a situation, or supporting them through something that's challenging for them, to realize that they're not at the place, they're not approaching things the same way we are, with our life experience and our comfort that we've developed over time. So I like that reminder from this book.
I will say that chapters 7 and 8, I felt like we were getting closer to some examples of how they do things differently in Denmark that mean their kids are growing up differently compared to the US.
Yeah. Now, having said that, I really liked that kind of reminder at the beginning. On the very next page, she went and pissed me off. I read it. Okay, so we read, our very first book club book was this John Holt shit show. I don't even remember what it was called. Teach Your Own, was that what we read?
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember reading the John Holt book and reading this section on dyslexia, but he didn't call it dyslexia. He called it backwards reading or something. And I'm sitting there going, is he saying dyslexia doesn't exist? Is that what he's saying here? And it was, the way it was written was a little tough to figure out. And I remember kind of having this moment where I had to reread it multiple times. And I had to reread this multiple times too, because I literally wrote a note in the margins that says, is she saying that a diagnosis is being used as a cop-out or a crutch? And I read it multiple times and I'm like, I think she's pulling some ableist crap on us. What were your thoughts on 140, Amanda?
Yeah. So I thought it started out well, right? Like page 140, it starts out well. She's talking about current generations, openly discussing how they have therapists and embracing mental health. And I'm like, yeah, like that's great, and she does this a few times throughout the book, and I'm all in. And then she goes on to say that embracing diagnoses like anxiety, ADHD, autism, etc., Her quote is literally, quote, "Perhaps the younger generation has unknowingly found a legitimate way to get a break in a demanding and achievement-driven world. If they have a diagnosis, it is acceptable and expected not to have to live up to the many demands of being unique in the world open to them." And my comment was, what kind of bullshit is this?
Yeah, fuck that.
Like, yeah, I mean, so, like at first she's going on and like, oh, it's so great. Embrace yourself, be who you are. And then it's like, but if you're not normal and you tell people about it, you're using it as an excuse. And then I said, well, you can just fuck right off with that. Right. Like,
Yes.
I think that for the most part, kids these days are much more open to putting all of the things out there
Mhm.
and saying, hey, I have this and there's that and this is going on, and it's embraced and accepted in a way of being like, look, there are lots of, like, people are made up of lots of pieces and that's how you get a whole. And I know I personally try to be, honest and out there and a bit of an open book with a lot of the things that I have going on, because I think that we really need to see that, right? Social media in some ways is full of not reality and not the truth. And so I think if I can be one more person out there saying, like, hey, we had infertility, we did IVF and it didn't work. And this is what it all looked like. And this is what we went through. And, hey, I have a disability and I do all of these things and it looks like I have all of this. But the reality is, after I'd had this trip, I was in bed for a week, or I have all of these doctor's appointments, or I had this or that. I think it's so important for people, for everyone's mental health, to see, like, I'm not alone.
Yes.
And it took a long time for me to get there. I talk all the time, like, I would never redo my 20s. I probably wouldn't redo my 30s. But I feel like by the time I got to my 40s, I'm like, look, this is who I am and I'm pretty cool with it. And I'm just going to put myself out there and, hope other people feel reassured by the fact that they're not alone and there's someone out there going through all of these kinds of things. And in a lot of ways, I feel like teenagers and young adults these days, and even kids who are growing up into teenagers, like, they already have some of that figured out in a way that I'm pretty envious of.
Yeah, I could see that. I hadn't thought of that, but when you say it that way, yeah, it's true. And I think there is more acceptance in putting yourself out there and saying, I have this thing or I have that thing. And it's certainly not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's different than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever that might be. The quote that you read, if we break it down a little bit, right? It says that they've used this as, hold on, let me see, a legitimate way to get a break in a demanding, achievement driven world. I would venture to say that people who are autistic, experiencing the world, have an ADHD brain, experiencing the world, etc., whatever your thing is from this list of crutches that she's given us here in her world, right? Experience the world so much freaking harder, right? I mean, so my kid can hear the light bulbs in a room, right? So he's sitting there, he's trying to do the exact same work that other kids are trying to do in that space, but he can feel the vibration from the floor from the air conditioner. He can hear the buzzing of the light bulbs. He can hear all that stuff. He can smell the deodorant of a kid that's sitting 4 rows away from him. All of that, right? There's nothing easier. There's nothing less demanding about his experience in the world. And then, that he doesn't have to live up to the demands that are being put on him. One of our society's great flaws that we still have going on is that we are still expecting our neurodivergent neighbors, loved ones, friends to live up to neurotypical standards, at least in the United States. Maybe in Denmark it's different. But here, the expectation is that we lean towards extroverted as a society and we lean towards neurotypical. The world is built for those two kinds of profiles. There's nothing easy about having to live up to the expectation of something that goes completely against your grain. So, did not like that. She lost a lot of brownie points with me on that. On that one, I was like,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think you're right in that we do expect everyone to meet this same kind of baseline. But I also think that the vast majority of the time, people who are saying, hey, I have this, hey, I have that, hey, I was diagnosed with this, they're not asking for anything different. Yes, there are accommodations and there are things like that, but that's a whole different conversation. And a lot of times they're not even asking for those accommodations, or they're not getting them. Like, they're just being open about who they are and what makes them who they are. And yeah, I mean, just the idea that, like, putting that out there, you expect people to accommodate you in a different way. I think for the most part, that's not even part of the conversation, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm if I tell someone that I have infertility, I don't expect them to stop talking about their baby, or the
Right.
fact that they're trying to have a baby, or any of that. Like, it's just a part of my story, and it helps you understand how I'm seeing things, or the lens that I'm coming from, or like, it just helps you understand me as a person. I'm not saying you need to do anything different. I'm just sharing who I am, like, it's actually not about anything else. Yeah, I was like, I don't
like
yep.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, off topic. Can I tell you the best story ever though? I
Okay.
hadn't even had a chance to tell you this. We went last week one day to the Skechers outlet that's in Charleston here. Liam needed a pair of sneakers, and we had Waffles with us, who's his service dog. And Liam always wears headphones in public. Always, always, always. He has them on in the house a lot too, just because the general house noise. It's taxing for him. And so we were there, and he found this pair of shoes that he loved, and they didn't have them in his size. So I asked one of the sales associates, hey, is there any chance you have more of these in the back? She went, she checked, she didn't, whatever. We ended up finding great shoes. That's not the point. So anyway, through our interaction with her, she said to me quietly, she said, I noticed the headphones and you've got a service dog. Do you need me to turn the music down a little bit in the store while you're shopping? I was like, what sort of parallel universe am I in? Because a lot of times
Yeah.
that doesn't, first of all, I wouldn't expect that. He comes with his accommodation, he comes prepared. So I
Yep.
wouldn't expect that. But how sweet was that, right? To just not make a big deal. It was very subtle. Hey, can I do this for you while you're in the store? And I thought, no, he's okay. But thank you so much for going that, for being that observant, and
Mhm.
then for making that offer. I was just, oh my gosh, I saved the receipt because her name is on it, and I need to email Skechers and shout her out because she was amazing. So, and we
Yeah.
did find good sneakers. So, but yeah, I mean, I just thought, like, really, what does it take to
Mhm.
just to make a small accommodation? So that was made my week that happened. I was so excited.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. All right, so we got past that. We go straight
Yeah.
from ableism to nudity. So let's do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so my notes say from basically like page 141 to 145, she's discussing embracing all body types. And I I'm going to say I think Danes embrace all body types and nudity much more than Americans, generally
Hmm.
speaking, right? And that goes everything from, naked showers before entering pools to naked saunas together, right? And I will say, the naked showers are in your own, in gendered locker rooms, but I will never forget the first time I was in a Danish hotel, and it was next to like a community center, and we decided, oh, it was really cold, and the pools, they're like, oh, they're thermal pools, they're very warm, you should go enjoy. And so we went over, and like there was signs, and it was like, oh, so you get totally naked to take your shower before you get in the pool. Like, I can't imagine that ever happening in the United States.
Could you imagine the pearl clutching? Oh my goodness. Right.
Yeah, right.
I mean, people here get their panties in a twist over who's peeing in a closed stall next to them.
Yeah.
It's like, seriously, you're in a stall. Who cares who's peeing next to you? You pee and leave. It's all good.
Mhm. Yeah, for
Yeah,
real.
I think that's true. I liked this.
I will say there was a quote that I really liked. I pulled out. She said, quote, nudity can feel incredibly liberating when done naturally in the proper setting. I hope that nudity in itself can be kept separate from anything sexualizing or quote unquote naughty. And I really liked that, right? And because I think I don't know about in other countries, but in the United States for sure, any sort of nudity very quickly becomes sexualized
Mm-hmm.
or about that, instead of just this idea that like the naked body is just the body. We all have one. And, that idea of like just because I'm naked, it's not a sexy thing. It's not an invitation to smack my ass. It's not an invitation to ogle my breast. Like it's none of that, right? It's just a body. And this idea, in Denmark where you're sitting together in saunas and co-ed saunas, or, doing these kinds of things, or doing the winter swimming in the ocean. It became a big thing again during the pandemic. They've always done it, but and it's just a thing. And I wish that we were better about accepting that. And when occasionally you see someone on a parenting group say that they do something along those lines, and they almost immediately get dogpiled on by people who are like, oh my God, you shouldn't be naked past 3 years old. Like they understand, they know, like it's just, it does not need to be that way. But kind of going, she continues on. So on page 143, she is talking about the rise in plastic surgery for teens. And I did not know this. She talks about Snapchat dysmorphia. And apparently the new thing is like teens are not bringing in pictures of celebrities like back in the good old days. Like, I want to look like this person. They're bringing in filtered images from like these different social media apps. That just like, it totally blew my mind. So quick moment of vulnerability, right? I was very anorexic. It started in junior high. It went through high school. And by the time I was in college, I was very, very sick with it. And at one point I had to get quite a bit of treatment to get better. Right. And so anorexia is kind of one of those things. It's sort of like diabetes, right? Like you can have it under control, but it never goes away. It's always a part of your life. And I'm well, I'm healthy. I'm fine now. But in college and university, when I was really going through treatment, my therapist said that I needed to stop reading magazines, all magazines. And I really like fashion, and I like to know, like I was just telling her, I really need to do some research on what the trendy purses are for the season, because I need a new purse and I want to get something on trend. And my therapist was like, you have to stop like every magazine, because there's not a single real picture in a single magazine out there. They're all airbrushed. And I want you to stop looking at them, full stop across the board. And that was a really hard thing for me to do. It's not even that simple these days, right? I mean, because it's so crazy. We don't have Snapchat. I have TikTok only because of the podcast. And I was randomly looking at some of the filters on TikTok just to see. I was like, oh my gosh, like they do. Some of them make you look totally different, but some of them just, smooth everything out and make you look like you've been airbrushed. I'm like, that is not reality. That is not real.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't even occur to me that those filters, and it makes perfect sense that teens would be looking at that and thinking, I look so much better on this than I do. And how can I look like that in real life? And all of that. But, and we're not on Snapchat either. So I don't know that it would have entered my thought process without this book. But I thought, that's dangerous stuff right there. That's really not a great thing for our teen minds and impressionable minds, still developing brains, unsure of who you are in the world. And then to have that put on top of it, bad news bears. No good.
Yeah. Because that's it. You're not even looking at other people just always being filtered. You can filter yourself and start to think that that's what you should look like, which is not, all of it.
A better version of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Next session is on inclusion.
Yeah. So we do talk about inclusion quite a bit coming up, which is awesome. There's a line on 153 that said, I would prefer to erase everything that has to do with gender stigmas and just focus on creating a safe place where all teenagers can come to us with their insecurities without being ashamed or feeling foolish, irrespective of wet dreams or blood on the sheets. And it's true.
Yeah.
I think in general, our culture is probably just a bit more pearl clutching and prudish than European culture as a whole, probably.
Yeah.
And so it's natural that our kids might feel uncomfortable coming to us with certain things, or that we don't approach things as proactively or explain things with as much confidence as they do in Denmark. So it was interesting to read this section.
Yeah, this we're getting into more and more of the things that I'm like, I think if we could do a better job of this kind of stuff, right, our kids would have a much better chance at having a higher baseline happiness level. So the next page on 154 starts the actual entire section on inclusion. And a quote that I pulled out was, "Today, it doesn't matter if you define yourself as a boy or a girl. Not everyone is homosexual or heterosexual." She goes on to give an example where she says she observed two children meeting each other for the first time. One asked the other, "Are you a boy?" To which the other replied, "No." And then they said, "Are you a girl then?" And they said, "No, I'm just a person." And the one who asked just accepted it and they started playing. And I do think that generally this is true, right? The United States is, and the world, it's not really fair to say just the United States, because the entire world is kind of going through this time when conservatives are trying to grab power, and there's there's some real struggles and issues there. But even with that, and a lot of that coming from parents and white nationalists, you I feel like you still have, for the most part, kids who are just way more accepting of these things, right? And this idea of like, well, it doesn't have to be clearly defined, and it's always been a spectrum, and I'm okay with it being a spectrum. And parents are having a much harder time. They're struggling with it a lot more than the kids are. And this idea of like, oh, we didn't used to have cross-dressers. Of course we did. You can go back and look at all of it, like, oh, we didn't used to have gay people. Like, of course we did, like you can go look every war where men wrote letters. We've got record of gay men who were in war writing letters, right? Like these things, they're not new. And that ability to just be more accepting and to not make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Hello. My kids, after Hamilton came out and it was all the rage, my older two did this whole deep dive on Hamilton. They found letters in his attic years and years later between him and John Lawrence. And if you recall in the play, when John Lawrence dies, it's this huge, devastating loss for him. And their letters lead us to believe that he and John Lawrence were more than friends. And so here you have a founding father. But of course, the crowd that loves to bang their chests and scream about the Declaration of Independence, they won't acknowledge that because that's not one of the things that they want to acknowledge from there. But yeah, I mean, it's all throughout history. Of course, it's a part of the human experience, so it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So just on the next page, I had again, it's one of those, and part of it is probably cultural difference and things, right? So on page 155, she is talking about things, and I will say that I dislike that she specifically says LGBTQ plus. First off, I would expand that. It's pretty well established that it's LGBTQ IA. I always get the AI mixed up because I have a bad brain with those kinds of things. But that's pretty well established. And then she's saying specifically like this group has a new way of thinking about things. And I don't think we're going to limit it to just folks who actually fall in that group. But I did think it was interesting to think about. She says, people see gender as three things that can point in different directions. How the body is created biologically, called sex, the gender you perceive yourself to be, called gender, and then the gender expression itself, for example, what clothes you wear. I just thought, like, I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more nuance and things like that. But it is a good thing for most parents to stop and think about, right? It's not as simple as, are you a boy? Are you a girl? Girls do this, boys do that. Like there's it's pretty well established that there are these other factors in there. And to break it down into those three kind of buckets and think about it from that perspective is a great first step if you're not already open to this and thinking about these things.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. The kids, for the most part, unless they've been taught otherwise, they're accepting and they're open and they'll kind of go with whatever. Oh, okay, that's your thing. Okay, great. I
Yeah.
mean, they really don't know to question it unless they've been taught to question it in some
Mhm.
ways. Or they have questions, but they're innocent questions, or
Yeah.
they're easily satisfied questions. So it's pretty straightforward enough, right?
So the next thing I had pulled out was on page 158, and she gives the definition that the World Health Organization uses to define sexuality, and then she kind of summarizes it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I have a little bit of a hard time with the actual WHO blurb, so I liked her summary as, quote, sexuality as the physical and mental energy that makes us seek love, warmth, and intimacy, expressed in how we feel, move, touch, and are touched. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I liked from the Who blurb was just a very basic reminder that sexuality is not synonymous with intercourse, that they're separate. And I think for anybody who grew up in a super religious environment,
Mm.
there's a lot of confusion with any form of sexuality or any sort of anything, right? Just
Mhm.
pleasure and all of that kind of stuff. Ooh, so taboo and so controversial in so many ways. And so not discussed and
Mhm.
all of that. So this chapter is very foreign territory for me in some of those ways, because this was just not at all the experience that I had growing up, and I've tried to do better for my own kids, and part of that just had to involve outsourcing some stuff, because there's still things that I don't feel, not that I don't feel comfortable discussing from a prudish perspective, but feel comfortable discussing from an informational perspective,
Mm.
because I was just so limited in what I learned. So I just kind of liked the straightforwardness of some of the parts in the Who statement that kind of broke that down, because I feel like there's probably plenty of other people listening to us who grew up in very purity churchy cultures that have the same stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? That's a great point, that you can be sexual, you can be sensual, you can be sexy, you can do all of those things for yourself. And it can be tied to personal satisfaction, personal gratification, personal pleasure. It can just be how you want to express yourself. None of it has to actually have anything to do with intercourse itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then she goes into a whole section on what we see in movies, and she talks about porn and things like that, and talks about how some of this stuff just is not reality,
Mhm.
and the danger in our kids thinking that this is reality, that this is how it works, and that they will then have disappointing situations in their own sexual development because they're expecting it to look or occur like it does in what they're seeing in movies and television, and for their partners to look a certain way too, which is
Mhm.
also obviously not realistic in most cases. Which I thought was interesting. And I made a note too. I don't know if this has been your experience, but like, I feel like that can even happen with partners sometimes. I feel like in our circles, I mean, we are in a group chat with a whole bunch of other women, and we talk about sex, and we talk about all, not, I mean, it's not all we talk about, but it comes up, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I feel like we have more honest conversations as women
Mhm.
than our partners are necessarily having, if we have male partners, especially, who are not having those conversations with their friends. And I feel like, because I've had these conversations with my husband where I'm like, you think that all these guys are having like wild swinging from the chandelier sex like every day of the week. And I go, their wives are my friends. I'm telling you, dude, they're not, right? And so they have this perception of what other couples are doing. And then it kind of carries over into, and I'm like, yeah, no, dude, that is not, you are not basing your expectation on reality sometimes,
Mhm.
And I feel like women
Yeah.
have come to have more open and honest conversations about sex, at least in my experience, than the guys are. And I don't know if it's because they're embarrassed or because they're boasting and so they're not sharing what's actually happening or whatever is. I don't know. I do not want to be a fly on the wall of a man cave at a poker game or a bar night or something like that. No, thank you. But it was interesting to me because I kind of saw a correlation between the two with our kids watching these external things as well and having those experiences.
Yeah. I had not thought of that, but I could see that for sure. But I do think that that's one of those cultural differences, right? That we still have a long way to go on, that idea behind toxic masculinity and how honest they're really being with each other about a lot of things. Yeah, that is an interesting little nugget, food for thought. So I find that the whole topic, the whole idea of talking about porn and around porn, there's an entire section on it in the book. And I think it's interesting and it's worthwhile to have that discussion. It's complicated. I feel like it's extra complicated in the United States. There are a lot of really strong feelings about it, and it's really, really prevalent. I saw some shocking statistics about how many 8-year-olds have seen porn.
Oh
Mostly by accident, or an older kid who showed it to them on the bus or, whatever. They shouldn't have seen it and they didn't really know what it was. And they didn't understand that they should have talked through it with an adult. And so if we're talking about this and it makes you uncomfortable, or if, you were raised in a family where it was like, oh, it's very bad and you absolutely shouldn't. And you're now at a point where you're like, well, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, or I want to unpack that, or I want to learn more. There are plenty of resources out there. I know I personally bought a class. I think it was called the porn course, maybe, that's specifically for parents and like encourages you to sit down with your partner and think about your expectations and your ideas and what you want to do with it and the reality of it and how you're going to approach it with your kids, and making sure that you have a shared family language and vocabulary around it, and this kind of stuff. And that idea that like it will be an issue far earlier than you ever think it should be. And so, like, get ahead of it in your parenting with your partner. And so I'm just going to put that out there before we say anything else.
Yeah.
And then in this section, there were a couple things I pulled out that I was like, oh, those quotes really got to me. So the first one was on the middle of page 161. She says, porn is performance sex. And I had to laugh at that. Like, it's so true, right? And she goes on to talk about that more, right? And she's talking about how, like, oh, in porn, they always have an erection, and the scenes where they can't get hard, like, they cut those out, right? And you don't know that, and the woman is always just ready and waiting, and
Yeah.
like, that's not reality either, and like these kinds of things.
I feel like it's the equivalent of watching a cooking show that's like 30-minute meals. Like, okay, this just popped into my head, right? Like, get a 30-minute meals thing and have your kids try to make the meal in 30 minutes and be like, do you see how what's on television is not reality and it's total crap because somebody already chopped her onions and chopped her garlic and whatever else? Okay, porn is the same thing, but
the
just
same, yeah.
Not a 30-minute meal.
For me, it made me think of those the musical episodes. Like, every long running TV show will have an episode where they make it a musical, and you're like, what is happening? This is not how people walk around like singing. Like, this is not, like, it's because it's so far beyond just movie magic. Like, my kid will always say, like, we'll watch things. My husband will be like, how did that happen? I'm like, it's movie magic. Don't worry about it. Like, it's TV, like, it's TV magic. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's like, it's even beyond that, right? It's just so not reality or realistic in all of the ways, right? It's all outliers. Every part of it is an outlier. Then there was another quote that I was like, I just think it's really true and good food for thought. She said, quote, porn is not necessarily bad, and I do not want to speak for or against it. But one thing is for sure, it is very different from real sex.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, right? I mean, I don't think it really matters what kind of porn you've watched or where you've watched it, or whether it was ethical porn or unethical porn. I don't think any of that matters. The reality is it's not what's happening in your bedroom. I'm very happy in the bedroom. It's still not porn. You know, maybe closer to like mild rom-com book stuff, you know, like not even like the smutty books that I like is not happening in the bedroom, you know, like
Nobody's buying
it's
DVDs of what's going on in your bedroom. Yeah.
ew, you know, I mean, I you can have a great sex life. It's still not what's portrayed
Right.
in porn or the vast majority of smut books or the online writing that is out there that people like to go read. You know, I mean, like, it's just not.
Yeah. It's not reality. And so if
Nope.
we prepare them for that, they'll be a lot less disappointed when their time when
Yep.
their time in the sun comes. All right. So, all right, we have one more chapter to discuss, but before we do, we want to let you know next week is going to be our last week of reading Raising Danish Teens. Our next book and our final book for season 1, how exciting is that, is going to be Blake Bowles' book, Better Than College. You can find the link in our show notes, our podcast description, if you like reading along with us. I will say I first read this book back in 2020, and it really helped me let go of some of the final homeschooling fears that I had around, am I completely screwing this up? Should I be doing something different, etc. But it's been 4 years, so I've evolved a bunch in my parenting, and my kids are older, 4 years older, which is a huge difference in kid world. And so I'll be excited to reread it and then also get Amanda's take on it. Obviously, it'll be a new read for you, correct?
Yeah, I haven't read it.
Yeah. So if you like to read along with us, now's a great time to order the book. We will put the link to the book in the notes, which is pretty awesome. Side note, while I'm opening my book to chapter 8, Blake also runs unschooling trips. My kid has traveled with Blake, and they're super awesome. So if you are kind of in the unschooling field or that spectrum of learning, he's a pretty cool person to have on your radar. There's some cool unschooling stuff coming out of Blake's world. So pretty good. All right, so chapter 8 is called No Ultimatums, Embracing Them While Raging. Okay. So, I had quite a few things that I liked in here. I liked some of your notes, Amanda. I'm excited to hear you talk about them. On 167, she says, in Denmark, most parents won't use their quote unquote power in such a way because we strive for a more level parenting system as opposed to a hierarchy of dominance. Danes engage their teenagers in a more democratic and less authoritarian style. Obedience isn't the main thing, but reciprocity and mutual respect are the focus when dealing with difficulties. And we talked about this in last week's episode about parenting styles and all of that. So if you listen to that, you won't really be surprised that I liked that paragraph. So not much new there.
Yeah, that's it. It's a good chapter, but I feel like for the most part, the entire chapter can be underlined with authoritative parenting is superior to authoritarian parenting. Give it a go.
Yeah. Exactly.
So in the just on the next page, she defines ultimatum, and I didn't understand this. So she says ultimatum is a term used to describe the final requirements of a negotiation. I don't understand what she's getting at. Genuinely curious. Because to me, I'm like super pro negotiation, and I really want my kiddo to learn how to negotiate effectively. But I don't understand why an ultimatum is the final part of negotiation.
It was interesting. The only thing that I jumped to when I read that was when you've got nothing else, right? When you can't come to an agreement, when you're at a stalemate, the ultimatum is boom. That's the only thing that I could take from how it was written.
So maybe like when negotiation has failed, you turn to an ultimatum
and say it's this or nothing. Or
like when negotiation or compromise have failed, you have like an ultimatum is what's left kind of thing, maybe. Okay,
that's
I can
kind
see
of
that.
what I don't know that I'm right, but that's how I interpreted it.
No, I mean, I can see that. That makes more sense than what I'm like. I do not understand what, like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Even to the point where I went on Google and searched like parenting ultimatums so that I could read them to like, do I not understand what a parenting ultimatum is? Like, do I not understand what an ultimatum is? Like, no, I think that we just see this very differently.
And it could be language in there too, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking we've talked about it before. We're not positive that this book was published in English. I think it might have been because it says it was first published in Great Britain in 2023, but I don't know that she wrote it in English, or even still, English is still not her native language. So I was thinking maybe there was some of that in there too when she described that.
Yeah, maybe. So we're on page 163, and she goes into all of these statements, and I just like my note says, "Lisai, I don't believe you." She says, "I do not believe in ultimatums." Like, I don't know how you don't believe in ultimatums. Like, they're
They
a
exist.
thing. Yeah, exactly. Like you might say you don't agree with ultimatums, but I'm not sure how you don't believe in them. She says, I have never used ultimatums. I call bullshit. And she says, I never raised my voice. Also, I call bullshit. Like, who has never raised their voice? It reminds me of my husband, who will be yelling at you, insisting that he's never yelled.
Oh my gosh, are we married to the same person? I'm not yelling. I'm like, you're fucking yelling right now, dude. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, I feel so much better right now.
Like, just like, okay, I get it. You're upset and you're not yelling. You're just yelling. Like, it's okay. um, yeah, I will say I struggled with this chapter a bit, because I don't think that ultimatums are great. I don't think they're the best parenting tool to pull out, but I definitely use ultimatums in my parenting. Um, I like there she talks about it at different places, so I think that I typed up more at some point, right? But I was really thinking about it, and I'm like, we haven't in our house, Winston hasn't watched Sunday morning TV in months because I was so fed up and frustrated with the state of his room and the fact that I can't walk into it currently, that I was like, that's it. No more Sunday morning free TV time until your room is cleaned up. And he's decided that he's okay with that. And so it's just been months. I mean, I think I laid that down in June and it's October, So, I mean, now that said, there are times when I am absolutely frustrated and I totally lose my cool and I'm like, you're never going to get that back. And then, afterwards, when everyone has calmed down, I come back and I'm like, okay, we know that was silly. That was, like, I shouldn't have said that and I didn't mean it. And, I'm sorry for saying that in frustration and sorting that out afterwards. And maybe those are the kinds of ultimatums she's referring to. I feel like she might feel differently, like strong consequences and boundaries are not ultimatums, but I don't necessarily think I think you're splitting hairs there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I read it. I was thinking, so my boys wanted to go to Pokemon tonight. They go to Pokemon basically every night. And I'd been asking my oldest kiddo to put a couple of his woodshop things that he has opted not to take and put into storage during our move. And he said, oh, I'm going to sell these things. Okay, great. Like he had a planer and a couple of other things. And it had been, I'd reminded him a couple of times, like, hey, I need you to get those listed. I mean, it's Thursday. We're packing the truck Tuesday. I really need you to get those things on Facebook Marketplace if you're going to do that thing. And, he's neurodivergent. He's ADHD. He forgets stuff. I forget stuff. We all forget stuff. So, I'm like, I'm okay with that. And there's a lot going on right now, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been so helpful, like just amazingly helpful. So I'm not going to give him a super hard time about it, but I had asked him or like given him a reminder a couple of times. And so yesterday, actually it was yesterday, they wanted to go to Pokemon yesterday. And I said, hey, I'm going to need you to get those listed before you head out to Pokemon tonight. Okay. So like, it wasn't like if you don't do this, you can't go to Pokemon, but it was that. It was just
It
the gentle
was.
parenting
But
version
that's,
of,
I mean, it
right.
was.
It was just the gentle parenting version of like, hey, I'm going to need you to prioritize that before you prioritize your fun tonight. I'm not saying you can't go. You totally can. I just need you to make sure that happens before you leave. Okay. And he was like, I mean, I didn't even say it in so many words, and he did it, you know? And so, but I didn't have to say like, you're not going to be able to go and blah, 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 you know? And so I don't know if like that's what she's, because I don't really approach things in that way, but you know, he just
But
needed
have
like
you never? Can you honestly say that you've
oh,
never done that?
oh no, I'm sure when my kids were younger, especially, and I was still finding my comfort zone as a parent and the way each of them needed to be parented, I'm sure I did, you know, I'm positive. So yeah.
Well, that's it.
I
Or like on a really tired day when you're just like,
right.
no.
Yeah. I mean that was the note that I wrote down about page 168 as I put her nevers, and I put her nevers in quotes, are strong statements. You know, like in general, I agree with the sentiment that she's trying to
Yeah.
share, but I think I'm very hesitant about statements where I always do this and I never do that. And it's like, because we're people and nobody can ever be quite that consistent, you know?
Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to do that, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
we both had the same note on 175. Again, I just think it's hilarious that we just did an episode on this, having no clue that this was going to come up in this week's reading. But
Mhm.
last week we talked about respect with kids and parenting styles, and we were talking about the difference between authoritarian, authoritative, permissive parenting, etc., etc. And so she's got some stuff in here about that, and she's got a thing here that says two-way communication is encouraged, whereas teenagers who grow up with authoritarian parents receive orders instead of requests from their parents.
So on 175, she says, essentially, in authoritative parenting, quote, two-way communication is encouraged. And yeah, we just talked about that last week, right? And then this idea that if you grow up in a household where you are given orders, right, it's kids are they're significantly less open.
Yeah. Shocking.
I know.
Right? Oh my goodness. Who would have guessed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we talked about this last week too, but I thought it was interesting on 176. She says you cannot be an authoritative parent without being clear and distinct in frameworks and values. And she said the laissez-faire approach has had a renaissance dressed in new clothes that has produced a generation of bargaining adolescents who do not respect authorities and the boundaries of others because they have learned that they must be involved in all decisions on equal footing with their parents. It creates hurdles in schools and families because they have been taught that the world is about them and their needs, rather than being led by adults who know what is best for them most of the time. And it was interesting because that was my thought last week, was a little bit of like, that I wonder how much of the backlash against gentle parenting is really a backlash against permissive parenting that's being called gentle parenting, because gentle parenting has rules and has boundaries, but it's done with kindness. And it's done in a very intentional way. And so when we were preparing for last week's episode, I found this video that was a compilation of teachers, for the most part, on TikTok, who were just going on and on about experiences that they'd had with kids in school. And I don't doubt them for a minute. I'm sure they're very valid experiences. They have a really difficult job. But it was interesting because I had two thoughts watching it. The first was the whole gentle and permissive parenting and kind of that dividing line between them that might be a little bit blurry. But then the other thing I thought was like, well, if this is such a rampant issue in schools, what is it about the environment that these children are spending the majority of their waking hours in that's not working? Because that's also an issue as well. And so it was kind of interesting that we've just covered that, and now here we are again.
Yeah. Also on page 177, I had pulled out this quote. She says, suppose you want your teen to listen to what you say in mutual respect. In that case, you must be physically around them, present and available, and ready to show in action how good values and life are practiced healthily. And for me, in that whole paragraph, right, it's, she's just talking about the importance of showing up for your kids. And, we're busy. Life is busy. There's never enough time. I don't have enough time. I don't
No.
have enough time in my day. I don't know anyone who's like, I got plenty of time to get to all of the things that I want to and all of the ways that I want to. But you have to prioritize the things that really matter to you. And I would argue, especially when it comes to your children, right? Your personal health and your mental well-being and that whole, like don't pour from an empty cup and whatever. There's thoughts on that, right? We have thoughts on that. But at the end of the day, your children are only little and you only have this window of opportunity to establish this relationship and to, really set them up for success as adults for a limited amount of time. And if you waste away that time because it was more important to have a clean home or because it was more important to, work more at a salaried job, right? I'm not talking you're working more because you need the overtime because the overtime pay helps your family survive, but you have a salaried job and it's more important to work way more than your salaried hours kind of thing. Like you're missing a really important time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. Then she's got, I'm not even kidding, Amanda. It's like she read our minds because we just talked about timeouts and time ins.
Versus time ins, yeah.
Right? We just talked about that. And now here we are again on 178. So she talks about when you are, when you and your kid have a thing, right? There's a little bit of an implosion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of letting them go off in their room and close the door and calm down on their own, that they should be calm in the middle of the house so that they're involved and they feel loved and supported and all that kind of stuff there. So I wrote down, and I will say this is so true, like if I go off on my own and stew over something, it's usually if I'm annoyed with my husband. And if I go off and stew on my own, oh, the aftermath is going to be 100 times. The longer I stew, the worse it is for it. Right? So I was like, oh, from that perspective, this would probably be better. But I liked your thoughts also, Amanda.
Yeah. So first off, her example of a timeout was sending your teen to their room for hours until they've learned their lesson, which I was like, that's not a timeout to me. I don't know. That's just like,
well, then what lesson do you learn sitting in your room by yourself? Like that's so random. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, that whole thing. I was like, I suppose there are people doing that and that it still happens. And I'm not at that point right now, but I could totally see there being a point where I'm like, just go to your room. I just need you to go to your room because we only have 2 rooms and I cannot be in the same room as you and you don't want me in your room. So you need to be in your room. Like I can see us getting there. So, let's real life, right? Like real talk. That'll happen in my house, I'm sure. But she gives this example of the sacred armchair in the living room where anyone can sit in it when they're upset and they need to calm down. And I was just like, I do not want to be in the freaking middle of the family space while I'm upset, like listening to everyone do their stuff and like the TV is on and my husband's on his conference call and the kids all tap, tap, tap. Can I like, oh, no. It's only going to get so much worse. Like
I'm going to go in my sacred alone bedroom. Yeah.
Right? Like for the most part, I need that like time and space to myself to calm down and figure out what I want to say about the situation, figure out where I feel about it, what the next step is going to be, what conversation needs to be had to move on from it. And that sure as shit isn't happening in my sacred armchair in the middle of the living room. Like, no.
That's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. No sacred armchair at Amanda's house. Got it.
No. Okay. No. And like I was thinking about it and I can see, like when you have littles, not sending them into their room, and keeping them in the main space because you need to be able to see them. But I can totally see when you have older kids where you don't have to keep an eye on them and they can be in their room safely. Like you're mad and I want you in your room. Like, do not storm out with your car keys to go drive while you're pissed off. Like, that's a bad idea. Like, don't go out and make really poor choices because you were prone to poor choices anyway, because your frontal lobe isn't sorted out and now you're mad. And so you're going to make even worse choices. Like, like, go to your room. Sometimes I grab my keys and I leave, but it's just so I can sit in my car in the parking garage under our condo building, right? Because we don't have the space. Sometimes I just need to be further away than our 1,100 square foot condo. I'm not driving. I'm being responsible. I'm not driving angry, okay?
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I could totally see that. Oh, goodness. All right. So then she's got on page 181 a bit about telling teens, not using no statement with teens, like don't do this or don't do that, but instead telling them what you want to do. This is corporate America spiel to me, right? This is when you go to how to manager things on how to talk to employees and stuff. It's always like, don't tell them what you don't want, tell them what you do want. That's the whole thing. So she talks about that in here a little bit as well.
Yeah, but also super parenting, right? I mean, like, how many times have you heard, and it's hard, like, I suppose if you didn't learn it at a young age or when your children were young, it's not top of mind. But that whole thing of don't say, don't run, tell them, please walk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because don't run is like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And please walk is,
should I skip?
I should walk.
Yeah.
Like, and so it's very clear. And I do agree with that. The thing that I took issue with in this section is that she says specifically that teens don't hear the word no. So if you say, don't drink alcohol, they hear an invitation to go drink. And I was like, I mean, again, I don't have teens, so I can't say with a high degree of authority, but that seems like hogwash.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they know how to hear the word no. I was thinking maybe it was sort of clever language to say that there's this human knee-jerk reaction to when as soon as you tell me I can't do something, now I want that thing, right?
Sure.
Like,
don't think of the blue elephant. Like, now I can't stop thinking about a blue elephant. Right.
Exactly. So that's kind of where I took that was as soon as you tell them that they can't do something, now that's all they can think about and all that they want to do. That's different than the way it's written in the book, though. So I'm definitely interpreting that because that's not really what she said. So, but that's kind of how I took it, that there's kind of this knee-jerk reaction to just rebel in some way and do the opposite of what you've been told not to do, and be like, therefore I must do that thing. Like, I had no intention of walking on train tracks before, but now that you've told me I can't, I definitely want to walk on train tracks.
Should try that out.
Yeah. Could be fun. There's a reason that she's telling me not to do it. It's because it's amazing and she's keeping it all to herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like, I can think of lots of reasons that it's not a good way to communicate, but I was just like, I don't think that it's that they don't hear it. They can't hear no. Like,
pretty sure they can.
They hear it. They just choose to do something else with it than what I'd like.
I'm not an audiologist, but I'm pretty sure they can hear the word.
Yeah. All right. So we're almost done. We only have a few more comments. So let's see. Mine is a little longer. Surprise, surprise. But we both have on page 183. So I had said, she's talking about the fact that you need to keep tabs on your teens' lives and follow them as closely as when they were little. You must keep asking about their lives without giving advice. You must involve them and listen attentively as you would with any other adult. And I mean, I feel like that's kind of one of those things that should be obvious, but sometimes you need to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And she's talking about kind of in the broader context that, kids are pushing away as teenagers. That's kind of a fundamental. They start to push away as they're trying to develop their independence and figure out who they are outside and away from their parents. that process can make parents feel like they don't need to keep asking. And she goes a step further, talking about parents who feel rejected and all of this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, those parents really need therapy. Like if your kid like pushing away is like means that much to you and your identity, like you need to work on that and sort that out yourself. That's a you problem, not a them problem. But I do think that it's probably one of those things where most teens act like they don't want it, but they still do. And hopefully when they grow up, when they get older and more mature, they're not so, I don't even know the right word, but that like, well, I don't want it, but I totally do, right? No one wants to be in those relationships where you're like guessing because they want the opposite of what they said. But
exactly.
They're teens.
There'll be a phase of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah. All right. The last note I had, and I'm guessing you didn't make a note about this because you were just like, what the hell is she talking about? Is that accurate? Like,
well, I had ideas, and
okay.
also, I was going to say in a few weeks, but it's longer than a few weeks. Like in a month and a half, we're going to be in Denmark. And I was totally like, I'm going to look for one of these buttons in the grocery store. She says you can find them in grocery stores. So I'm going to look.
It would be pretty fun. If you do, you have to bring one to the podcast and see if we can figure this out. So she talks about this PYT, which it's a word. It's not an acronym, PYT. It says it's translated to never mind is kind of the best possible translation. And sometimes teens kind of get to determine what is PYT and like throw that word out there, like never mind, if something isn't really a big deal. It says it's helpful to learn that not everything has to be dramatic, even though the hormones swirl around in their system and call for big emotions. So I read this whole section and I'm still not really sure that I understand the concept of PYT, or however you pronounce that, but it did remind me of something that a friend of mine said that stuck with me. And so I was like, I'm going to share it because, so I was having kind of a rough couple of weeks in parenting land around this time last year. One of my kids was just having kind of this big, like, and it was what it really boiled down to was all very typical teen emotions, physical change, hormonal change, all of that. But when it's happening to you and you can't verify that this is typical and that it's happening to everyone else, my teen felt like they were absolutely losing their mind, right? Like, this is only happening to me. I must be crazy. I must be insane. I must be losing my mind. Had gone online and diagnosed themselves with like 700 things that none of which actually we did our due diligence. None of those things are actually the case. It was normal teen stuff or very typical age appropriate developmental things. And once they knew that, they calmed down about all the things and they were like, oh, okay. So anyway, I had phoned a friend during this particular stage because some of the things that were coming up I knew had happened in her life a little bit earlier with her teen. And she said she was seeing a therapist, her kid was seeing a therapist, all of that. And her therapist said, we'll call her kid Susie for anonymity's sake. Her therapist said to her, this is Susie's roller coaster and you don't have to get on it. Right? Susie can ride her roller coaster. You just need to be there to make sure that it's safe and that her buckle is fastened and all of that. And the roller coaster can go. You don't have to join them on this bananas hormonal teenage roller coaster. At the end, you'll say, hi, what did you, not did you have a good time? Because I don't think anybody has a good time on a hormonal teenage roller coaster, but that they'll come off and you'll give them a big hug and you'll continue on. Right. And so you're there for kind of checkpoints. And it helped me tremendously. Like, I don't have to get on this bananas roller coaster. So I figured I'd bring that because that was the only thing that I kind of thought of when I read that section.
So for me, it was similar to that. To me, it most equated to, in our world, a lot of times I'll say like, it is what it is. It is what it is. Not never mind, because I feel like never mind is kind of dismissive.
Yes.
And usually never mind actually means it's problematic, but I can't be bothered to it takes too many spoons. It takes too much energy to loop you in on it. So never mind, I'll deal with it myself. And from the explanation of of this PYT, however you pronounce the word, to me, it seemed more like it is what it is. And that idea of teaching your kids to be able to say that around things and let the little things go. And a way of saying, of letting everyone else know as well, like, I realize this is a little thing and I'm letting it go. But also understanding the importance of the fact that I shouldn't tell you, it is what it is, right? Like empowering your kids to say it. And it seems like it's so much a thing in Denmark that they have these like funny buttons that you can buy and push as like a, just a way of breaking the tension, or, like a reminder of like, it's not that serious, like it is what it is.
Diffuses.
It's not that serious. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know for sure because, yeah, like you said, sometimes she doesn't do a great job of explaining things that are really culturally specific.
Right. And I'm like, I have a vague idea of what you're talking about, but not really.
Yeah. So we might be right about it. We might be totally wrong about it.
Exactly. We'll apply it how we do, and we'll see how it goes.
Yep, totally. All right. So yeah, I'm not sad that we've been reading it, but I'm also happy that next week is our last chapter. 2 chapters.
Two chapters and the epilogue, I think.
Yeah, but 2 short chapters. They're short this time. So short chapters and an epilogue. Well, thank you so much for joining us today here for the book club. We would love to continue the conversation with you. So by all means, please consider joining our Patreon if you would like. It's easy to find, and join our Facebook group. All you have to do to find the Facebook group is go to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, search it, filter for groups, and then you'll find the actual specific group. And tune in next week for the conclusion of the Danish way of raising teens. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have an awesome day.